That night, I did not hand over $500,000 as my daughter and her husband demanded. I only left a box on the table. Inside was not money, but evidence strong enough to bury everything they had once boasted about. By the time they opened it, I was already on a plane, disappearing from Denver, starting a new life. No one could believe that I, a father once mocked as a living ATM, could turn the tables, sending my son-in-law to prison for gambling debts, and leaving my daughter penniless, begging me to save her 2 children. If you want to know how a father who seemed powerless turned silence into a weapon, and why the entire city was in uproar when the truth came out, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from. Your support is the only motivation for me to continue revealing these unexpected secrets. The doorbell rang 3 urgent times, cutting through the silence of the Cherry Creek villa. I set my glass of wine down on the walnut table and listened. 3 chimes, quick, impatient. I knew it could only be one person, Rachel, my own daughter. She never had the patience to press the bell just once like a normal person. From the glass panel in my study, I saw headlights sweep across the porch. A white Porsche Cayenne stood boldly at the gate. Rachel stepped out first, wearing a beige fur coat, her blonde hair falling neatly, but her face already tight with strain. Behind her was Blake Turner, her husband, polished on the outside, but his eyes glued to his phone screen, fingers swiping fast as if checking crypto prices or basketball scores. I walked into the foyer, leather shoes tapping lightly on the Italian marble floor. On the walls hung family photos I still kept. Rachel at 8 in a white dress by Sloan Lake, her high school graduation from East High, and the wedding photo when she was 32. Those frames had once been my pride. Now they felt like reminders that love and hope had been turned into tools. Rachel rushed to hug me. The hug was a little too long, a little too stiff, as if she were investing affection to draw profit later. I stood still, my back rigid. Blake didn't bother to greet me, heading straight into the living room as if the house belonged to him. "Dad?" Rachel began, her voice deliberately softened. "I'm sorry for coming so late, but this is extremely urgent." I followed them into the living room. My brown leather armchair, my familiar seat, had already been taken by Blake. He calmly spread a stack of papers across the coffee table as if presiding over a board meeting. Rachel sat beside him, fingers nervously twisting the diamond ring, her grandmother's heirloom. I knew that habit. Since childhood, whenever she lied, Rachel would twist her ring or pick at her nails. "Let me get straight to it." Blake lifted his head, skipping courtesy. "We need $605,000 by noon tomorrow, wired into my account." I lifted my glass, my hand trembling slightly. 605,000? I repeated, each word heavy as stone. "You know," Blake smirked, "with your wealth, that amount is nothing." Rachel interjected, her voice quivering as if on the verge of tears. "Dad, please. If not, we'll lose everything. The house, the kids, our reputation. You always said family comes first. We are your family." I stared into my daughter's eyes without answering. In that instant, memories flooded back. The sleepless nights I spent building a hospital chain from nothing. The tuition checks I signed for her. The times I cheered from the bleachers. All erased by tonight's cold demand. I set the glass down. "Anything else?" Blake leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This isn't a bank loan. The people we owe aren't as patient as banks. If you don't help, there will be consequences. Not just for us, but for you." His expensive cologne mixed with the bourbon in my hand, forming a toxic haze in the air. Rachel lowered her face, her eyes wet but without a single tear. I rose and walked toward the fireplace, my back to them. The old grandfather clock ticked steadily. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and said softly, "Fine, tomorrow." Rachel leapt up, hugging me as if I had agreed. Blake stood, offering his hand, the grip deliberately crushing to assert dominance. I did not return it. They left, the Porsche speeding into the night. I watched the red taillights vanish around the bend. In the silence, my heartbeat pounded like a drum. 5 minutes later, when the car was gone, I pulled out my phone. My fingers dialed a familiar number. After only 2 rings, a voice answered. "Harvey here. What's so urgent at midnight?" I glanced at the clock, striking 12. My voice sinking low. "They've crossed the line. Tonight, I begin." On the other end, Harvey sighed. "I knew this day would come. Get ready, Stephen. Tomorrow morning we'll close the door they never saw coming." The second hand of the grandfather clock clicked steadily in the study, mingling with the bourbon still lingering on the desk. I sat back in the polished oak chair, my heart heavy. The phone screen glowed, showing the name Harvey McMillan. This man had been with me for 20 years, my private lawyer, my morning coffee companion, the witness to every time I bailed Rachel out of crises she and her husband had created. "Harvey," I rasped. Tonight I heard it from their own mouths. 605,000 by noon tomorrow. On the line, Harvey was silent for a few seconds. Then papers shuffled. "Stephen, I did exactly as you asked last week. The house on West Arapahoe where you put down 250,000 for the down payment? That property was never under Rachel's name. It still belongs to the Caldwell Family Trust. They think they have rights, but legally they never did." I closed my eyes. The familiar migraine spread from my temple to the back of my neck. Harvey's words were morphine, but also a knife cutting through the last shred of trust. After hanging up, I let the room sink into darkness, memories dragging me backward. 15 years ago, I remembered the morning Rachel ran into the kitchen waving her Stanford acceptance letter, eyes shining like stars. I hugged her tightly, ignoring the hot coffee spilling across the table. "Dad will handle everything," I told her. And I did. Over 200,000 for tuition, not counting books and housing. I never complained, just wanted her to have the chance I never had. At her wedding, I paid nearly the entire bill at the Brown Palace Hotel. 150,000 vanished in applause, in Rachel's radiant smile, and in my first handshake with Blake, then still the promising young son-in-law. 3 years later, when Rachel lamented, "We can't afford a good neighborhood house for the kids," I pulled out my checkbook again. 250,000 for the down payment. I wired it directly from the company account, but Harvey whispered, "Keep the deed in the trust, just in case." At the time, I thought, just in case meant taxes. I never imagined it would mean tonight. Another memory surged. 12 years ago, I walked into Rachel's room and found her sobbing after her boyfriend left. I sat beside her and handed her my mother's handkerchief. She choked out, "All I need is you, Dad." That promise with those tear-stained eyes became chains I carried for years. But slowly, those tender words turned into endless demands. The peak was her 30th birthday party, when she announced in front of me and her friends, "Dad is just a breathing ATM." Everyone laughed while I sat frozen, my glass trembling. Back then I told myself, she's only joking. But now that line hammered in my mind, proving it was never a joke. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old folder. Bank statements, every transfer I had made for Rachel and Blake. Each line, each figure etched deeper scars. 40,000 for Blake's business venture. 75,000 for Rachel's midnight emergency fund. 120,000 for a startup that lasted only 3 months. Altogether, nearly 1,200,000. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. In that moment, I realized I had paid for love with checks, and my daughter had learned the wrong lesson. That affection is measured by an account balance. Outside the window, the streetlight shone on the family portrait hanging on the wall. Rachel stood beside me, 16 years old, wearing a red prom dress, her smile innocent. Seeing that, I suddenly felt an irreparable distance. The girl in the photo had been gone for a long time. replaced by the woman tonight, who coldly pressured me to sign checks and even used memories of her mother as a weapon. The phone buzzed again. Harvey sent a message. The documents were recorded this afternoon at 4 o'clock. You are safe. They know nothing. I folded the file closed, feeling as if a door had just shut. In my chest, my heart beat slow and steady, like a drum signaling the start of a battle. I stood up and looked around the silent villa. Each object, the piano Rachel once practiced on, the sofa where Blake used to dine, now felt like props in a tragic play. Very well, I whispered to myself. If they want a game, I will rewrite the rules. I went into the records room and switched on the warm lamp. Rows of cardboard boxes were neatly arranged. 20 years of records, contracts, printed emails, screenshots. Every piece of evidence I had kept for unclear reasons suddenly shone with value. Outside, the night wind moved through the trees, carrying the familiar pine resin scent of Colorado. I felt a strange calm, no longer the silence of someone taking blows, but the quiet of someone about to make the final move. I wrote a short line in the leather notebook I'd kept for 30 years. Plan. Box of truth. Begin tomorrow. The nib was still wet with ink when I closed the page, knowing there would be no turning back tomorrow. I turned on the records room light, the yellow glow falling on the tall wooden shelves, where I had carefully stored every scrap of memory and every document for 20 years. The file bundles were numbered and filed by year, tied with a cloth string. Rachel had mocked me many times for living like a tax library, but that meticulousness had become a weapon. I pulled the safe drawer against the wall, spun the code 3 times, and the heavy door swung open, revealing clear plastic-wrapped stacks of documents. Each page there reminded me of truths Rachel and Blake deliberately ignored. Tuition checks, transfers to the so-called startup, credit card bills I had paid when they were unable. On top, I found the commitment Blake had signed in 2020, scrawled, "This will be the last request." He had signed it under the light of a wine party without bothering to read it. I set it aside with a faint smile. My hands continued to sift through envelopes. Printed Instagram photos of Rachel were clipped neatly. A radiant smile on a Cabo trip, a wine glass in Napa Valley, a new Hermes bag shown after I had transferred another $15,000. I slotted those photos into the file, each with dates. They would tell a story. The cruel contrast between the "we are poor" act Rachel sobbed tonight, and their shamelessly lavish lifestyle. From a small drawer, I took out a black USB. The home security cameras I had installed after the burglary 2 years ago had recorded tonight in full. Rachel faking tears, Blake making threats, and the line he sneered, "These aren't bank people, Steve. They'll ruin you." In Colorado, one-party recording is legal. I was that party. For the first time, I felt grateful for state law. I gathered everything and packed it into an ordinary brown cardboard box, the kind used for Amazon deliveries, humble in appearance but holding the life they wanted to plunder. I divided it into 5 layers. First, the deed to the West Arapahoe house with the Caldwell Family Trust, boldly named, with no line bearing Rachel's name. Second, the ledger totaling $1,200,000 over the past 8 years, with emergency withdrawals marked in red. Third, a photo of Blake at Caesar's Casino, dazed at a roulette table, timestamped just weeks earlier. Fourth, the USB labeled Security Footage, March 14th. And finally, Blake's prenuptial agreement signed before the wedding, page 41 circled in red, clause, "Any gambling debt exceeding $100,000 shall forfeit marital claims to family assets." I knew he had never read that far. I added a few supporting sheets. His emails to me, Rachel's messages to friends, printed with bold headings. "Dad's too pathetic to say no." On top, I placed a blank sheet with a black pen inscription, "You wanted it tomorrow. Here it is." I sat and stared at the box for a long time, my chest heavy as if I had signed a sentence, not for myself, but for my daughter. Yet it was the first time in years I felt back in control. The clock read 4:30 in the morning. I rose and walked down the long hallway toward the garage. The black Bentley gleamed under fluorescent light. I placed the suitcase I had packed yesterday into the trunk beside the cardboard box, which now carried the weight of an entire life. The Bentley's engine purred to life, its low roar echoing like a promise. I looked into the rearview mirror and caught the villa's hallway light one last time. Then I drove away without looking back. As the wheels rolled on Cherry Creek's damp road, my phone buzzed. A message from Harvey. "Ready to take over. Meet me at the office at 5:30 in the morning." I pressed the gas, knowing that when dawn broke, a new door would open and the game would officially begin. Denver had not yet lightened. Streetlights still painted faint yellow streaks on the cold, wet pavement. I drove the Bentley straight into downtown, the engine's steady hum matching the slowing rhythm of my heart. At 5:20 in the morning, I stopped in front of the glass tower, where Harvey McMillan's law office sat on the 19th floor. The glass doors opened into the hush of dawn. The security guard nodded as if he understood that this was no ordinary morning. The elevator carried me up, bright lights reflecting my drawn face at me, hollows in the eyes, but a sharper gaze than in years past. When the doors opened, Harvey stood there, tie neatly striped, holding a thick file. Beside him was Nina Park, a young paralegal with her black hair in a bun, an iPad in hand, and a stack of documents flagged, with colorful notes. "You're on time as always," Harvey murmured, his expression grave but trusting. I set the cardboard box on the long meeting table and pushed it toward them. Harvey glanced and nodded. "The weapon is ready." Nina set the iPad down and opened an email confirmation from the bank on the screen. Freeze accounts executed at 3 o'clock in the morning. All linked credit cards suspended. Joint accounts locked. I inhaled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Harvey drew a thin packet from his briefcase. "This is a limited power of attorney, effective for 60 days, limited to asset transfer and financial restructuring. You will sign here. No one can accuse you of handing over full control." I skimmed and signed with my father's fountain pen. The handwriting was shaky but resolute. Harvey continued. "Last night, I had the locks changed and the electronic gate code updated. The Cherry Creek Villa is the sole property titled in your name under the Caldwell Family Trust. Rachel and Blake do not live there. They only came to demand money. Changing the locks is fully legal to protect you from their unauthorized entry and from treating your home as theirs." I listened and nodded slowly. Nina handed me an envelope. "This is a photocopy of Blake Turner's prenuptial agreement, page 41. There is a clear clause. If he incurs a gambling debt exceeding $100,000, all marital claims to shared assets are immediately forfeited." He signed that document at the wedding with a duly certified notary. His lawyer was careless and did not read the entire contract, but the clause remains legally binding. I took the paper from the envelope and reread the bolded line, my eyes pausing at Blake's scrawled signature. I exhaled long, part relief, part bitterness. Harvey leaned on the table, voice lowered. "Stephen, after today, every bridge between you and them will collapse. Are you ready?" I looked out the glass at the first light of dawn striking the distant Rockies, frosting the peaks with a thin silver. Inside me, the anger had turned into another kind of stillness, like ice on a lake about to crack. "I've been ready since the moment they called me an ATM," I replied softly. Harvey nodded and pulled the cardboard box closer. "Then let's begin. Give them what they think they want, and tomorrow when they open the box, they will understand what truth really is." I squeezed my hand, feeling the pen's warmth from my signature, then looked at Harvey and said the last line, "Lock everything down. By noon today, they will have nothing left to cling to." As I left Harvey's office, the first light of dawn was spreading across Denver's sky. The streets were still sparse, with only a few early trucks passing by. I drove straight to the international airport, the Bentley gliding along I-70 like a black beast, sure of its destination. In the trunk was the suitcase of clothes I had neatly prepared the night before, and on the passenger seat, the thick envelope I would leave with the airline staff. Inside was the key to a public storage unit near the airport where I kept Rachel's keepsakes from when she was little. Photos, academic awards, the handwritten letters she used to write me at 12. She would only get that key when she truly faced herself. The parking area was quiet, neon columns casting a pale light on the damp pavement. I stopped at first class. The familiar valet hurried over and bowed. I handed him the Bentley key and another envelope. "Someone will come for it tomorrow. Keep it safe." The attendant looked surprised, but only nodded. I rolled the suitcase inside, where only a few passengers lingered at check-in. The agent looked at my passport and smiled. "Belize City, the 6:45 flight. Mr. Caldwell, I've upgraded you to business class as requested." I nodded lightly and said in a low voice, "Thank you." The fresh boarding pass lay in my hand, but my heart felt heavier. Standing in the wide hall, I suddenly realized I was not alone. A familiar figure approached, gray-streaked hair tied back, posture straight, eyes as sharp as ever. Laura Bennett, my ex-wife, who had left because she could not bear the pressure when I threw myself into work. "You—" I began softly, but Laura raised a hand to stop me. "Harvey called. He said I should be here. This isn't just your fight. Rachel's my child, too." I looked straight into her eyes, which held both reproach and the light of responsibility. "I don't need you to—" I started, but Laura cut in. "Not for you, for our daughter." We fell silent for a moment. The bitterness of the years since our divorce shrank into a quiet pause at the airport. Finally, I nodded. "If you've decided, come with me." We passed through security together, our suitcases rolling softly on the tiled floor. Everything proceeded as usual, but I knew this was not a vacation flight. It was a migration out of an old play, the opening to a new final act. Boarding the plane with glossy leather seats and the scent of early coffee in the air, I placed the suitcase overhead and sat by the window. Laura sat beside me, fastening her belt in silence. The plane taxied, the engines humming low through the fuselage. Outside, the Rockies faded under the morning sun. I closed my eyes and felt the thrust as the plane climbed into the sky. Everything that belonged to Denver, the villa, the hospital, the memories, and even last night's humiliation, grew small behind us. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Laura leaned in and said quietly, a blade through the hush, "Stephen, do you know? Rachel won't let this go. She will find you." I turned to her, our eyes met, and I knew this trip was not just an escape. It was the beginning of a long battle. By noon the next day, Denver's sunlight fell straight onto the quiet street where the Cherry Creek Villa stood proud among old pines. Rachel's white Porsche. Cayenne braked hard at the gate, road dust lifting like mist. Blake stepped out first, sunglasses covering most of his face, one hand still flicking his phone, while Rachel followed with hurried steps, her heels striking the concrete in sharp clacks. On the porch, the elderly neighbor, retired law professor Mr. O'Rourke, was watering plants. He looked up, blue eyes mixing curiosity and caution. Rachel punched the familiar gate code. A red light flashed. The iron gate stayed still. She tried again, then again, each press a short, stiff beep. The gate did not open. "What is this?" Rachel screamed, slamming the keypad. Blake cursed and tried the physical key. Useless. The lock had been changed. Anger flared. Rachel gripped her Hermes bag handle, eyes blazing. She spotted a neatly placed cardboard box on the wooden porch table. "There," she whispered, as if it were a saving envelope. They lunged for it, Blake tearing the tape. Inside, documents were stacked in cold, tidy layers. Rachel pulled the first sheet, a notarized copy of the West Arapahoe House deed, clearly naming the Caldwell Family Trust with a recorder's office seal. Her eyes bulged, lips shaking. No, impossible. This house is ours. Blake snatched it, skimmed, then hurled it down. Damn it! It was never in your name. Rachel dug further and pulled out a thick ledger. Dozens of transfer lines, a total at the end. $1,204,380. The margins were marked in red. Tuition, house, startup, emergency fund, each item like a knife. Her hand trembled. The sheet slipped and skittered down the steps. My God, she gasped, mascara smearing. Next came photos of Blake at a roulette table in Caesar's Palace, face stricken, casino lights glinting off sweat. Blake paled and reached to snatch them back, but Rachel had seen them. You swore it was only once, she screamed, cut short as Blake gripped her shoulders. Rachel shakily opened the included USB, plugged it into her phone with an adapter. The audio rang out in the still air. Blake's own voice from last night, cold and arrogant. These aren't bank people, Steve. They'll ruin you. Rachel froze, blood draining from her face. Then a cold laugh from Blake in the recording made even him falter, his real-time voice cracking. That's fabricated. But no more words were needed. Mr. O'Rourke, behind the fence, stopped watering and covered his mouth, eyes wide. He knew Colorado law well. One party recording is legal, and here that party was Stephen. Rachel rummaged on and found a photocopy of the prenuptial agreement. Page 41 tagged in yellow. Bold text. Any gambling debt exceeding $100,000 shall forfeit marital claims to family assets. Below was Blake Turner's signature, scrawled but undeniable. Rachel screamed and threw the document into her husband's face. You've destroyed me? Blake stumbled back, sunglasses dropping to the ground, panic plain in his eyes. Just then, Mrs. O'Rourke's voice carried over the fence. You have no right to be here. This is not your house. Leave now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. Rachel collapsed onto the steps, sobbing, while Blake kicked the box, papers scattering across the porch like dry leaves. But every sheet, every piece of evidence had seared itself into the eyes of those who saw. Blake dragged Rachel up and shouted, Let's go! We'll be back. It can't end like this. As they lunged for the car, Rachel glanced back and met the security camera's red blink on the eaves. She understood. This humiliation had been recorded, and soon the truth would spread beyond the Cherry Creek gate. Denver, the next morning, the papers Blake had kicked were blown across the porch and walkway. The Cherry Creek neighborhood was quiet, but a few neighbors walked their dogs each morning. They noticed the scattered paperwork and, curious, picked it up. Inside were bank-stamped transfer summaries, photos of Blake gambling in Las Vegas, and the highlighted prenup line, Any gambling debt exceeding $100,000 shall forfeit marital claims to family assets. Rumors traveled faster than any wind. By noon, the whole area was whispering, So the house isn't Rachel's. It's the Caldwell Trust's. Blake has gambling debts in the hundreds of thousands. Rachel felt herself unravel. She knew she could not cork the mouths of the wealthy enclave. That day, to salvage face, she dressed impeccably, did her makeup carefully, and drove the Porsche to the Wellsworth Bankers' wives' annual charity luncheon. There she still held a place of honor, or so she thought. But as she entered the Ritz-Carlton lobby, whispers met her. Some old friends quietly avoided her gaze. Others did not bother to hide their disdain. The news had preceded her. The deed copy, the prenup, the bold lines had appeared in the group chat that morning, passed around by someone from the block. Blake was different. He did not follow his wife. He knew the elite scorned failed men, especially gamblers. He went straight to the underground poker club in downtown Denver, where his friends gathered. This time, instead of a welcome, 3 men in dark suits pinned him to a wall. $150,000 still owed. Tomorrow, or you won't be holding cards again. Blake tried to protest, but his phone was ripped away and smashed. They left him trembling in the corner, full of dread. That afternoon, Rachel returned, face pale. She yelled at Blake, "See? I can't show my face to anyone. All because of you." Blake shouted back, "You think I wanted this? Your father set us up." Their fight rang into the street. A few neighbors, standing in their yards, heard every word, their doorbell cameras recording, quietly. Late that night, Rachel posted a Facebook status, a reflex, "Betrayed by my own family, thrown out of my own home. Who was the real traitor?" But the comments cut like knives. "Didn't you always brag that the house was in the trust's name? I worked at a bank. Caldwell supported you far too much. Blake Turner, I've seen his gambling photos since last year." Rachel wept silently before the screen, while Blake slammed his glass on the table and shouted, "We'll take it all back, one way or another." At that moment, Rachel's phone rang. An unknown number. A deep, husky male voice spoke slowly. "Does Mr. Turner know exactly how much he owes? We're coming tomorrow. We want to see him in person." Rachel looked at her husband, her whole body turning cold. The nightmare was no longer about face, but about the safety of their own lives. That night, the temporary apartment Rachel had rented in downtown Denver was smothered in heavy silence. Pale yellow light fell over her face, hiding the dark circles thickening around her eyes. Blake slumped at the bar cart, turning an empty glass over and over in his hand. His phone lay on the table, screen lit with 12 missed calls from unknown numbers. Rachel dared not touch it, but her eyes were drawn to that string of numbers, as if staring at a black shadow slipping into their lives. "You have to tell the truth," she whispered, her voice ragged. "How much is it really?" Blake didn't answer, only let out a thin, forced laugh, a sound more frightening than tears. Finally, he blurted, 150,000, yes, more than I admitted, and they're not ordinary debt collectors." Rachel collapsed into the chair, limbs giving way. She remembered old Mr. O'Rourke by the fence saying, "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." She had felt humiliated then, but now she wished someone would protect them from the dark force closing in. The very next day, as soon as Blake drove the old Jeep out of the underground garage, a black sedan tailed them. In the rearview mirror, Rachel caught the steel-cold eyes behind them. That car followed quietly to a bar where Blake planned to hide. When he stopped, 2 men in suits stepped out, long coats hanging low. One tapped the window lightly, his voice deep. "Mr. Turner, it's time to talk." Blake swallowed, signaled Rachel to stay put, then reluctantly opened the door. The exchange was brief. A crumpled paper was placed on the hood, a debt list bearing Blake's signature. "Tomorrow, if you don't pay, there will be consequences, and don't think your rich father-in-law will save you. He's turned his back." One sentence struck Rachel's heart. They knew everything. They knew Stephen was no longer this family's ATM. That afternoon, Rachel tried to salvage a shred of face. She picked up her 2 children from St. Mary's, the private school Stephen directly paid for. But at the cashier desk, the staffer spoke softly with eyes lowered. "I'm sorry. The Caldwell Trust account will stop paying next term. We need a new guarantee to hold the children's spots." Rachel went numb. Other parents glanced over, whispers rising. She bit her lip and hurried the children away as if fleeing a forming rumor. Late that night, Rachel returned to the apartment. Blake sat hollow-eyed before the single phone number the creditors had left. "What are you going to do?" she asked, voice shaking. Blake slammed the table. "I'll sell the Porsche. Enough to buy a few more weeks." Rachel burst into tears. "Enough for you, not enough to save this family." Right then, Rachel's screen lit up. In the Cherry Creek Next Door group, the doorbell camera clip from the O'Rourke's house had spread at breakneck speed. The footage of Rachel shouting at her husband, "See? I can't show my face to anyone, all because of you," and Blake yelling, "Your father set us up," rang out clearly. Comments poured in. Didn't expect the Turners were like this. Thought the house was in their name. Turns out it's the trust. Blake Turner? I've seen him at Caesars. In less than an hour, Denver 7 News ran excerpts in the evening broadcast with a Chiron reading, Scandal in the Caldwell Business Family. The entire city saw it. It was no longer a neighborhood matter. Rachel dropped to the floor, clutching her head. The phone rang again. This time it was Stephen's number. She stared, afraid to pick up. In that moment, she knew it was more than money. Their honor, marriage, and social standing were collapsing at once. Rachel did not sleep all night. The phone flashed nonstop. Press calls, old friends texting, even numbers from law offices. She screamed at Blake, "You've ruined everything. I can't face anyone." But Blake sat motionless, face buried in his hands, shoulders quivering. At first light, Stephen called again. Rachel hesitated, then answered. His voice was calm but firm. "What do you want to say to your father?" She choked. "Dad, I was wrong. But you can't abandon me now. We'll lose everything." He was silent for a few seconds, then cut in. "You lost it when you believed him, Rachel. What's happening is consequence, not punishment." She sobbed. "Please, at least think of the children." He sighed and ended the call. At noon, a thick envelope slid through their door. Inside was a photo of Blake sitting with his creditors at the casino, the shot dark, but his face unmistakable, along with a handwritten note. "Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, same place. Don't come if you don't have all the money." Blake's hands shook. Rachel snatched it and screamed. "They'll kill you!" He exploded, slamming the wall. "Without money, we're both dead anyway." That afternoon, Rachel drove the Porsche to Wells Fargo. She begged the branch manager for a loan against the West Arapahoe villa. But when the staff opened the file, the answer was cold. "I'm sorry. You have no right to mortgage it. The legal owner is the Caldwell Family Trust." Rachel stood frozen, the room spinning. Everything she had believed was hers. The house, the money her father gave, was a bubble. Back at the apartment, she found Blake drunk, the prenup copy before him with the gambling clause in bold. "He planned it all," Blake growled. "That old man wants to humiliate me." Rachel snapped back. "No, you destroyed yourself. I lost everything because of you." He lunged and gripped her arm. "You think you're innocent? You lived off your father, too. Bags, resorts. We're both leeches." Rachel tore free and slapped him. The crack rang out, the start of the final fracture. Late that night, Stephen sat in the small apartment he had rented in Boulder. Harvey set a thick file before him. Transfer copies, the prenup, and the viral video. "You have enough to end this. How will you use it?" Stephen was silent, eyes distant. "Not yet. They haven't hit bottom. When they do, this will truly be a blade." Just then the glass door of Rachel's apartment shuddered. 3 knocks. Rachel trembled and peeked through the curtain. In the hall stood 2 men in dark suits. They said nothing, only left an envelope and walked away. Rachel crouched and opened it. Inside was a rusty dagger and a hastily scrawled note. "Tomorrow, no money, there will be blood." The next morning, Denver was drenched in sunlight. But in Rachel and Blake's temporary apartment, the light only made their gaunt faces starker. The dagger and the threat note lay on the table like an invisible slash hanging in the air. Rachel whispered, shaking, "We have to call the police." Blake barked, "The police? You think they'll leave us alone if I report it? You don't understand them. This isn't a game." Meanwhile, in Boulder, Stephen walked into Harvey's office. On the big screen, he watched the next door clip and the Denver 7 broadcast on loop. Harvey spoke slowly. "The public knows half the truth. Now it's time to reveal the rest. The right place, the right time." Stephen frowned. "What do you mean?" Harvey slid a thick envelope toward him. Printed records, notarized deed copy, the recorded threat. "Denver Country Club is hosting a gala tonight. Rachel will surely attend to salvage her image. If you want a finishing blow, that is the place." Stephen looked out the window where sunlight washed the far mountains. If that is where they once treated me like a living bank, then that is where they will pay. That evening, the Denver Country Club's main hall glittered with crystal lights and soft jazz. The ladies wore gowns, the men tuxedos. Rachel appeared, trying to reclaim her image, a blazing red dress, chin high, but disdainful looks and secret whispers wrapped her like a web. Blake walked beside her, trying to look confident, but his collar was dark with sweat. Just as glasses were raised, the main lights dimmed. The LED screen at the rear of the hall lit up. First the club's familiar logo, then a cold voice. "These aren't bank people, Steve. They'll ruin you." Blake's own voice boomed through the hush. Next came the clip of Rachel screaming at the villa gate. "See? I can't show my face to anyone. All because of you." The crowd froze. Some mouths fell open. Others swung their gaze to Rachel and Blake in alarm. The screen rolled on. The prenuptial page enlarged. The bold line on page 41. "Any gambling debt exceeding $100,000 shall forfeit marital claims to family assets," followed by Blake's casino photos, eyes bloodshot, surrounded by losing cards. Rachel screamed, "Turn it off! Who did this?" But her voice drowned in the hall's murmur. Blake stood petrified, face chalk white. At that moment, Stephen stepped from the last row, walking straight-backed in a simple dark suit, calm radiating from him. The hall turned as one. His voice carried low and deliberate. "You ask who did this? I did. I am Rachel's father, and the man who paid for 8 years for their greed. But today, I no longer cover for them." The room erupted, and local media cameras, present to cover the gala, swung toward him. Stephen raised the file in his hand and said slowly, "All the evidence of the truth I will place on this table. Tonight, no one will leave here still believing in Blake and Rachel's facade." In that instant, Rachel collapsed into a chair, and Blake clenched his fists, his eyes blazing at his father-in-law as if at a mortal enemy. The entire hall of the Denver Country Club fell silent, with only a hive-like murmur. Stephen set the file on the red velvet-covered table in the center of the hall and opened the pages one by one. So slowly, it felt like torture. "This," he said, "is a notarized photocopy of the deed to the West Arapahoe house. From day one, it belonged to the Caldwell Family Trust. Rachel never had ownership." A wave of whispers broke out. A few ladies covered their mouths. Rachel trembled, lips moving without sound. Stephen turned another page. "This is the itemized ledger of the past 8 years. More than $1,200,000 were poured into them. Tuition, housing, failed startup projects, and even vacations. All from my money." Camera flashes popped non-stop. A Denver Post reporter, who had come only to cover a charity gala, now bent over, scribbling every word. The LED screen changed again. A photo of Blake at Sizer's flickered large enough that each bead of sweat on his forehead glittered under neon. Stephen held up the prenup, page 41 tagged in yellow. "Any gambling debt exceeding $100,000 shall forfeit marital claims to family assets." He looked straight at Blake. "You signed it. You knew. Your lawyer was drunk that day. The notary recorded everything. Don't claim you didn't understand what you agreed to." Blake roared, "You trapped me." But his voice cracked, drowned out by indignant murmurs. Some businessman hissed, "So his investment capital was borrowed money. He tried to rope me in once. Thank God I refused." Rachel leapt up and rushed to her father, eyes swimming. "Dad, please don't do this. I'll lose everything." Stephen looked at her, sad but firm. "You lost it when you let him lead you astray. I'm only showing the truth." Rachel crumpled, her muffled sobs echoing through the hall. Harvey, Stephen's lawyer, stepped forward, plugged a USB into the projector, and said clearly, "This is an extract from the Caldwell Villa's security cameras on Thanksgiving last year. The legal homeowner has the right to retain this recording." The clip played, Rachel's voice ringing out at the dinner. "My father is just an ATM. Press the button and money comes out." The crowd gasped. Many could hardly believe their ears. Rachel screamed, "No! That's out of context. You're misunderstanding." But no one believed any more. The spotlight swung to Blake. He was dripping sweat and shaking. A reporter moved in with a mic. "Mr. Turner, is it true you owe private creditors?" Blake was speechless. He glanced at Rachel and met eyes full of fury and despair. Stephen calmly gathered the documents and delivered the closing line. "This is no longer just my private matter. This is a warning to anyone who treats family as a gold mine to exploit. I've been silent too long. Tonight, the silence ends." The lights flared bright again, but before the hall could applaud, two dark figures appeared in the doorway. Two men in dark suits entered, eyes like ice. One spoke softly. It carried across the hall. "Blake Turner, it's time." The room froze. Rachel's head snapped up, her heart seeming to stop. The air in the Denver Country Club hung like lead. The two men moved in, polished shoes thudding on the wood. People parted, whispering in fear. Rachel screamed, "You can't come in here!" But no one stepped in to help. All eyes went to Stephen, as if he were the only arbiter left in this game. Blake shook and backed away. "We're in public. You can't—" One cut him off, voice low and cold. "A debt is a debt. 150,000. Pay today or—" He raised a hand, the slow gesture full of threat. Blake turned pleading eyes to Rachel, but she only shook her head, tears streaming. She understood that from the moment the ATM clip echoed across the city, no one could save them. Stephen stepped forward, back straight, voice clear. "You're looking for the wrong man. I don't pay for anyone anymore. This is the child I raised, but he is an adult who chose his path. If you want your money back, take it from him." The crowd murmured approval. A few nodded, eyes bearing witness to the verdict. Blake screamed, unhinged, "You caused this. If you hadn't turned your back, I wouldn't be here." Stephen met his gaze, sorrowful but resolute. "No, Blake. You turned your back on your own honor. I am only letting you face the consequences." At that moment, police sirens wailed at the gate, red and blue lights washing the glass. Harvey, who had called ahead, had prepared this. Two officers entered with warrants for fraudulent misrepresentation and illegal gambling association. One read aloud, "Blake Turner, you are under arrest for investigation." Blake thrashed, "No, you have no evidence." But Harvey lifted the thick file, voice even, "We have everything." Rachel collapsed into a chair, lipstick smeared, her red gown like a spreading bloodstain in the hall. No one approached. Those who once chatted and laughed with her stood off, watching a tragedy. Stephen turned and walked toward the doors, crystal light crowning him. Outside, Denver's cool night air washed his face. Harvey followed and asked softly, "Do you regret it?" Stephen shook his head, voice low. "I regret letting it slide this far, but I will never regret telling the truth." He looked up, starlight reflected in his eyes like a final affirmation. It was time to close the family ledger. Blake was led away in cuffs before hundreds of witnesses. Rachel covered her face and sobbed, but no tears could be believed. Stephen left the country club, his steps slow but sure out of betrayal's shadow. He had reclaimed his honor and delivered a lesson to the world. Family is not a bank, and silence is not endless. When the Denver Country Club's doors shut that night, Blake Turner's fate was sealed. He was no longer the strutting man in gleaming shoes, but the one who marched out in handcuffs under 100 stares. The next day's papers splashed the front page. Fake businessman, gambling debts, arrested for fraud and unlawful association. The name Blake Turner, once Rachel's pride, was now a stain the entire city knew. Only a few months later, the court held him pending trial on charges of fraudulent misrepresentation and illegal gambling association. The defense scrambled, but the file Harvey sent the prosecutor was overwhelming. The first instance verdict was clear. 6 years in prison, no way out. Rachel sat in the gallery that day, her face drained of blood. Each word of the sentence fell like a hammer, crushing the last hope her husband might escape. But the storm did not end there. The creditors did not relent just because Blake was in prison. They sent a cold message. A Turner family debt means the wife pays. If not, you and your 2 children will bear the consequences. Rachel collapsed inside. There was no way to dodge. She sold everything she could. The Porsche, the Hermes bags, the Cartier watch, even the evening gowns that once made her shine at parties. Rachel was left with nothing. The West Arapahoe house, where they had once lived and believed was theirs, but in fact titled to the Caldwell Family Trust, could no longer be called home. One early autumn morning, Rachel led her 2 children to my villa in Boulder, where I had changed every lock months earlier. On the porch, she knelt and choked out, "Dad, I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking you to let me and the kids stay, and to help them keep going to school. I promise I'll work and support us. I only ask you to shelter them." I stood still. In my daughter, I no longer saw the haughty figure in a red dress with garish lipstick, but a desperate mother. For the first time, Rachel did not speak of designer bags or demand spending money. She begged only for her children's schooling. I sighed, my voice rough. "I will pay the children's tuition because they are innocent. I will also let you and the kids stay in that house. But mark this well. I will not support you anymore. You must work, you must manage, and not a cent for luxury. If you want to start over, do it with your own hands." Rachel collapsed, clutching my legs, tears pouring. "Thank you, Dad. I promise I will live differently from now on." In the days that followed, Rachel truly went to work. First as a sales clerk at Nordstrom, then a night shift at a cafe. She recorded every expense in a notebook, shopped at Walmart, and learned to cook cheap, nutritious meals for the kids. At first, the looks around her were full of pity, but then the neighbors' attitudes changed. They saw that Rachel no longer hid, wore luxury to cover shame, but quietly took responsibility. One evening after a night shift, Rachel sat at the table, opened the tuition ledger, and marked the first installment she had paid with her modest wages. A tired but genuine smile flickered. The 2 children hugged their mother, proudly showing good test scores. Rachel knew this was the only way to regain trust, not with words, but with deeds. Many times I watched from a distance silently. I did not rush in or extend a hand. I only observed. Each time I saw Rachel bow to the teachers at drop-off, saw her in simple clothes and cheap but clean shoes, I exhaled with relief. The sorrow of a wayward child still lived in me, but at least now I knew she was learning the lesson I had wanted to teach all my life. One late night, I received a letter Rachel had left in the mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but firm. "Dad, I used to treat you like an ATM, and I lost everything. But today I earned my first wages to buy books for my child. I understand this is the lesson I must learn to grow up. Self-reliance. Thank you for still loving the kids, and I promise I will never live the way I did." I finished reading and nodded softly. Not complete forgiveness, but I believed that this time my daughter had truly changed. That night, I sat alone by the villa window as cold wind poured in. I looked at the warm light in the distance where the West Arapahoe house, now home to only Rachel and the 2 little ones living simply, still glowed. I whispered, "At last, she's learning." And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Perhaps the bitterest thing for a father is not being betrayed, but having to teach his own child the final lesson in self-respect. I am no longer a walking wallet, but a father who finally taught his child self-respect. Justice to me is not only the sentence handed to Blake. Justice is that Rachel no longer lives on someone else's money, but by her own hands. And when I saw her simple smile beside her 2 children, I understood. Perhaps the sweetest revenge is forcing the betrayer to grow up. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe justice sometimes begins at home, Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me where you are listening from. Your support is the motivation for me to keep telling the secrets so many families try to hide.